This is episode 2 of week 4 of the big game. Let's get to the first hand I'm going to play.
Straddled to 1600, so action on the loose cannon. Who folds? Vipper, 9-8 suited. Calls.
Suited connectors on the button look pretty good in a juiced up pot.
Barry calls. Antonio's out. Chow, King Deuce. He was the original.
So this isn't a raise coming in, is it? It's just, well, that must be a double straddle, not just a straddle. Oh, I guess Chow straddled, Rick double straddled, Viffer limp. I could raise. Maybe I should really take control of the hand a little bit. I think I was trying to avoid too big a pot. In a good game, I don't want to put that much in with this kind of hand, because really, raising with this hand, I'm more playing it like it's a bluff, just trying to take it down. Playing a small pot, I'm trying to hit pick up a flush draw or something like, a wheel, something like that. And win a big pot that way. So, I chose to keep the pot small, which is certainly reasonable.
Old straddler.
Play nice. Don't get greedy.
Chow.
Do not get greedy.
Okay.
Chow calls.
Oh, he says.
Raheem, ace 4. Checks.
Not as nice as last time. Still a pretty strong hand, though. I mean, if you're gonna straddle, you want cards like I got.
4 to the flop. Trey King, trip kings for Chow.
I'd most certainly want to have the cards Chow's got.
So on a flop like this, where 2 kings and a 3, checking isn't going to probably be a good plan, because if I check and someone bets, they're probably going to be able to take the pot away from me, or maybe I'll call them. But the worst thing is any card coming on the turn is going to be scary against just a pair of 3s. There's a decent chance I have the best hand, so I'm going to bet. Of course, now I wish I had raised pre-flop, which I probably would have if Viffer hadn't limped in. But Chow there he was the original straddler, got in cheap with his king deuce offsuit and 3 kings, so I'm going to lose something on this pot. We see the pot was 7,400. 4 guys came in for 1,600. There was 1,000 in strange money besides that. I probably don't have to bet too much here to find out where I am. Obviously, if I had 3 kings, which I'm going to try to represent and hope no one has a king, I wouldn't be betting the pot or anything near that. I'd just be betting a couple, 2,500, something in that range. Should be enough. That's only a third of the pot. I don't think I have to bet even a half the pot to chase everyone out and find out about where I am. If I get called, I'm almost for sure beat. Either someone had a pocket pair bigger than 3s or somebody has a king.
Basically flop the entire table dead.
Barry bets 3,000 with his 3s.
Barry might think his pair of 3s is the best hand.
Chow just calls. Rick folds.
And at this point, I'm done with it. Now you might say, well, Chow could just be floating me, just calling behind me with nothing. But if he was calling behind me with nothing, he had Viffer, and even worse, he had Rick behind him. And Rick probably can't lay down a 3. Chow's going to have a hard time calling with nothing there with really 2 of the loosest guys at the table behind him. So I think, in my mind, once Chow called, I'm done with the hand. If he doesn't have a king, he has a pair bigger than 3s. If I hit my ace, I'm probably not, I may just check fold even then. Maybe I'll pay him off if an ace came on the turn or a 3 came on the turn, but probably not, because looks like he's got a king.
I would have raised.
And Viffer's out.
There aren't really any draws in this flop, so once Chow calls, Barry's spidey sense is probably tingling.
The turn, 10 of hearts. Barry checks. Chow checks.
And Chow's smart enough to know that on a nothing flop like that, when he calls, I think he has a king. So he's going to do everything he can to convince me he doesn't. But, really, once he called, it's over. He probably should actually bet the turn against me, because he's really in danger if I happen to have a pair of fours or something like that, and a 4 comes on the river, where there was no way I was putting any more money in the pot, and unless a 4 came, and now he's going to give away 13,000 that's already there, and some more money I'm going to get on the river. So I don't think against me his check is that good. Against Rick Raheem, and maybe someone else who's an action player, and might get in trouble with worse hands. Maybe it's worth the risk that he's given a free card. Again, it's a free card that doesn't rate to hurt him, but sometimes it will. Like I say, against me, I think he's just giving me a free shot. I guess we didn't get to see what would have happened if an ace came on the river, if it would have worked, and I would have put some extra money in the pot calling him on the river.
Chow's hoping to rope Barry in any way he can.
4 on the river. Barry checks. Chow fires 6,000. And Barry folds.
No, you have a king.
I had ace-4. I think my 4...
And you see I got away from it pretty comfortably. Chow's claiming he was afraid I had a king with a better kicker. Maybe he was playing pretty snug this session. Maybe he was afraid of that and just was playing his hand defensively, figuring there's no reason for him to put any extra money because I'm not going to play a worse hand than a king at this point, which I guess he was right. So his check had a dual purpose. One is give me a chance to do something stupid, and 2 to make sure he didn't lose a big pot by being up against a king with a better kicker.
Pair. Chow folds.
Okay, Antonio limped in here.
Rick Raheem's in. The loose cannon on the button. Trying to kick it into gear. Let's see what he's got. That'd be not much.
You can't win if you don't play, man.
Yeah, it's not even good enough.
Rick's got a point, but he's playing them all, and he's losing more than Troy is.
4 players to the flop as Viffer called and Barry checked. Trey 6 deuce.
Barry Greenstein flops the nut straight.
So, obviously a very nice flop for me. And it's so good. Deuce 3, 6 of different suits. Now, this is actually drastically better than another flop I could flop the nuts with 3, 6, 7 of different suits. Became 3, 6, 7. Now, any card, an 8, 9, or a 10 are really bad cards on the turn. Or not really bad, but they give someone a chance to have the nuts against my hand, which will be the second or third nuts. But with Deuce 3, 6, where I have 2 cards under, there aren't any. I mean, I don't want the board to pair, but outside of that, nothing's going to come off that's going to give someone a better hand than mine. So this is so good, I can easily slow play this hand. And the other problem is, if I bet, I guess Viffer's in the small blind with 9, 6 offsuit. If I bet into the other 2 people, actually into 3 people, Viffer behind me and the other 2, it's going to look like, the minimum I would probably bet with in this situation where people limped in here is a 6. I might bet with a 3 also, but it looks pretty strong. I'm going to chase out everything but a 6. So if I bet here, I'm not going to get many callers, but I want someone with a 3 to get involved. A 3 is not going to call me if I bet, but a 3 may bet. So if I check, someone with a 3 will bet, I'll get some extra money in the pot. And again, this hand is so strong. What I really want to have happen is someone with either, remember they limped in. You never know what kind of garbage they have. Somebody could have Jack 3 suited, Jack 6 suited. What I'm hoping is, I just picked a Jack at random, but the point is if somebody paired on the flop and then they have some other overcard in their hand and they hit that on the turn, they might end up losing a lot of money to me. And so, I don't mind giving a free card to someone who it's going to hang them. And like I said, I'm not worried about getting drawn out. So you will see me check and hope someone else bets.
Viffer checks. Barry checks. As Fondiari bets 2,000.
And again, let me reiterate, if it was 3-6-7, now I probably would have bet, figuring, well, a 6 or 7, a 7 will certainly call me. Guy with a 6 may very likely call me. And if someone has some sort of gut shot draw, even something goofy, if it comes 3-6-7, someone might have we see Viffer with 6-9, someone could add 5-9, hit an 8 on the turn, make the 9 high straight. Why give them the chance? At least make them pay if they are going to draw out of you, so you make enough money the times they miss to offset that.
He's got a pair and a gut shot.
Raheem's out of here.
Viffer's got top pair.
He calls.
And now the question is, should I raise? If I raise here, it's pretty much going to announce. Remember, I was the big blind in an unraised pot where I could have anything. It's going to announce I have something like at least 2 pair. Because if I had just a 6, I probably would have bet it. So they're going to think I've do 6 or 3-6, something like that. And most likely that beats whatever these two guys are in with, and I may just take it down right there. So again, with such a great flop, and with a flop that's so hard to get drawn out on at this point, it makes more sense for me to call and give the impression instead I have something like 3-4, a pair and a gut shot. And now it could give one of them reason to try to bet me off my hand.
And Barry just calls.
With this flop, there isn't much of a chance of someone drawing out on Barry, so he's going to slow play the nuts.
7 of hearts on the turn. It goes check, check.
Does put some bigger draws out there.
As Fondiari bets 5,600.
And of course, the 7 of hearts wasn't the best card. As I was saying, I would have liked something bigger. We can see with Viffer's holding, a 9 would have been a card that would have probably gotten me, a real big pot if, as long as Viffer doesn't hit his 4 outs to make a full house. So that was the idea when I called behind him. And a 7 puts up a possible heart flush draw, and also picks up bigger straight draws. Now it ends up that neither of them had bigger straight draws. Viffer was drawing dead at this point, and Antonio just had a gut shot to tie. But I don't know that. Now, Antonio bet 5,600. Let's subtract that from the 13.8 that's there. So we bet that into a pot of 8,200. That's a pretty hefty bet. And Viffer now has second pair, and he still knows he's an experienced player. You have a bunch of guys in an unraised pot, and the board comes small. It gives a lot of room for people to have better hands than just a pair of 6s. Meaning that all the 2 pairs are still possible. And but he has a tough decision, and you could see him calling, but he also has me to worry about behind him, and he has nowhere to go. He's not like he has some sort of draw besides hitting his 9 or his 6. So let's see what he does, and well, first let's see what Viffer does.
600.
Viffer folds.
He looked over at me. I grabbed my chips. Usually that's weakness when people grab their chips. So, it's part of the reason I was probably trying to give it a reversed. I'll grab my chips early, which is a way of, usually for more inexperienced players, they grab their chips to try to get the guy not to raise. Well, I'll do that sometimes as a reverse tell to act like I don't want the guy to raise, where we see here I actually did want him to raise. And now the question is, should I call? If I was behind Antonio, maybe I would. But in front of him, it just seems too much like if I call here, Antonio's got to have something for those 2 bets. And I'm just afraid that he has enough, like what he did, to just actually he had less than I thought. I was thinking he had a 6. I was thinking he probably had more like Viffer's hand. If I call here, I still expect on most rivers, it's going to go check, check. So I decided it's better to hope that part of the reason Antonio bet big here is he had picked up, in addition to whatever he flopped, he had picked up a draw. An example, where he might bet like that is something like ace-6 of hearts. Well, he's going to check the river when he misses with that hand, so I better make him pay for his draw at this point by raising.
Barry still got the nuts, but if Antonio is drawing, Barry's going to want to make him pay.
Greenstein raises to 15,000.
Barry's raising, hoping whatever Antonio let out with was good enough to call with. Antonio may see through this, though, since Barry overcalled the flop. A veritable blank hit on the turn, and now Barry's check raising. These are all very strong moves.
I don't know what Antonio saw through or not. First, let's look at my bet sizing. I raised almost 10,000 into a pot that was about 18,000 before that point, so a little more than half the pot. And he just doesn't have much of a hand. When I raise here, obviously if I'm not bluffing, he's easily beat, and he's just got a pair and a gut shot. And he's got the worst side of the gut shot, and by that I mean if he calls and a 5 comes off, he may not even have the best hand. If he had 5s and a 4 came off, well, then it's hard to put someone on. The only hand that would beat him then is 5-8. With the 4s and a 5 comes off, obviously if I was semi-bluffing with 8-9, which doesn't make sense, how did I call on the flop? So I guess, could I have 5-8? Well, yeah, I guess I could semi-bluff with 5-8. I wasn't the big blind. I would have flopped a gut shot. Now I made an open-end straight, so I could be making a play with that. But like I said, with 5, sorry. Why don't we erase some of that thought? If a 5 comes off, here's the problem. If a 5 comes off, I could already have 4-8. A gut shot. Let's say, well, he has the 4 of hearts. Nah, forget about all that. The main problem is he's beat, and he's hoping for really just a 5, and in this case, we see even a 5 is going to make him tie. There's just nothing much in the pot for him to, there's no good reason for him to call. The only real thing left for him to think about is, can he raise and take the pot away? He grabbed a bunch of chips, maybe just to get a reaction out of me, which he's probably not going to get. But it'd really be far-fetched for him to try to take a pot away from me here, because I probably have at least 2 pair, and I may end up going the distance with 2 pair if he tries to take it away right here.
Both of which may be too strong moves for Antonio to call with just a pair and a gut shot.
And Antonio does fold. So a decent-sized pot picked up by Barry Greenstein.
Given what Antonio was holding, I think Barry got pretty close to max value on that hand. Must be because of his lucky cufflinks.
Or perhaps because of Antonio's unlucky red shirt.
His unlucky chest hair.
We're back to the grooming kit now, huh?
I don't think
Chow straddles to 800.
Yeah.
Rick Rahim makes it a double straddle, so the action begins on the loose cannon.
I can straddle for more.
Troy folds.
Troy's getting visibly frustrated.
Suited connectors for Viffer, who raises to 5,100, and pocket rockets for Barry.
Well,
One thing that's come in vogue these days, people 3-bet more than they used to back years ago. But I see a lot of players, they 3-bet, even with some of their garbage types hands. When they finally pick up aces or kings, they call because they're afraid to raise people out of a pot. I don't like that method, and I usually find that it's easier for me to play against some of the young players who do that, because it's almost like I can 4-bet more easily against them, because when they 3-bet me, I know they don't have aces or kings. They're just some guys who call with their aces and kings and make it easy for me to 4-bet them off some of their 3-bets. My philosophy is whatever bad hands you're going to raise with, that means you have to raise with your good hands in the same situation to I guess the word for it is balance those two things out so people don't know where you are. So you rarely are going to see me call with aces when there's a raise in front of me, unless there are two ingredients. Well, the main ingredient is that people behind me are the type of people who are going to try to pick up this pot. Are aggressive players who, when they see two people with money in the pot, re-raise enough that I can trap them that way. So that's the first ingredient. And the other is the right amount of chips. If I have too little, you might as well get the money in now where I think the guy is going to call me. And sometimes if I have too much, I don't like slow playing it either, because I'm given a cheap draw at my hand. And if you have aces, what very often happens to a lot of players with aces is they win small pots and lose big pots. When you're playing deep stacked, no limit hold'em, if you're always just playing your big pair small, well, what happens when the pot's really big? It's because someone flopped a set. So, and isn't that often that you also flop a set with them? So, normal play. I do enough 3-betting that I can 3-bet here with my good hand and not give away. That's what I have.
Straddling and re-straddling, Barry will get to play a bigger pot with these aces.
Re-raises to 16-2. Action folds around to the double straddler.
I was calling your 5,000 without hesitation with these cards.
Rick folds. So now back to Vipper.
7-6 suited is one of the...
And at this point you might say, hey, it would have been better off to slow play, let Viffer in with the 7-6. But that's not really a hand that I want to give a cheap flop against my aces. Ace-Queen is a much better hand to give a cheap flop against my aces. Maybe he'll hit the last ace and lose a big pot. Maybe he'll flop a queen and lose a big pot. 7-6 of clubs is the kind of hand where if he flops something small, we may end up being even, or he may be a favorite on the flop when he outflops me. So I do need to make him pay with this hand.
Best hands mathematically for trying to snap off big pocket pairs, but with so much preflop action, effective stack sizes have been lowered, and he actually has worse odds to call.
Joe sounds so smart. I wonder if there was even one of those words that he thought himself without Jimmy Fricke putting them in his mouth.
Viffer does fold.
Barry manages to pick up a nice little pot without even having to see a flop, thanks to the straddle and the double straddle.
Well, that pot...
I want him to bet the turn.
Action folds around to Raheem. 6-deuce. Folds. Troy Howard, the loose cannon, on the button. King 10. Raised to 1,200. Viffer folds. Barry Greenstein, 6-5 offsuit.
Barry's reaching for chips. He'll be happy to play a pot with the loose cannon, even with unsuited connectors.
42, I think. 42.
A re-raise to 4,200.
So at this point in the game, I've played enough with Troy. I don't really know his game, but I feel comfortable enough that he didn't want me raising. He's raising on the button. We've already talked about the position he's in. Makes it really difficult. And although against some players, I don't want to over-raise, and like I've talked about before, and give away the strength of my hand, against a guy like Troy, with the limited bankroll, means raising the maximum, raising the pot here, is just more pressure on him. Just makes it prices him out of chasing me with more hands. So with his hand, I might have even folded in this situation. It's just not a hand I want to put in too much money and chase with.
Troy calls.
Good luck, Troy. And Barry.
No, you gotta root for Troy.
Barry's out of position, but he did make a habit of putting the pressure on the last loose cannon he played with.
9-ace-9 on the flop. Barry first to act and fires 5,000.
And at this point, with that kind of flop, you figure when I bet, if he doesn't have an ace or 9, he's going to fold. And we haven't seen much from Troy, so it looks like the operation is about to be a success.
We know Barry missed, but we also know he continuation bets 100% of the time. Let's see what Troy knows. It's tough to withstand the heat when you get re-raised pre-flop and then bet into.
Troy's coming over the top to 10 grand.
So here's something. You know when guys play online, they have all these statistics on different players of what they'll do, how often they'll raise, all these types of things, and that'd come in handy right here. Obviously I don't have a lot of information on Troy. We haven't seen him do much, and it looked a little stinky, but the guy's putting in 10,000. I know he's only got like about 80,000 in front of him to play this game, and I did have a thought of maybe I should raise him back because, if he had an ace, wouldn't he rather keep the pot small? Because I don't think he had ace-king when he just called. If he had a 9, would he just sit behind me and let me bet again with my ace? I wasn't sure. And then I said, I haven't seen him do anything. I don't even know if he's capable of doing anything. So after a little thought, I said, why mess with it? I'll just give the guy credit.
Min raise. We'll see how Barry interprets it.
Barry folds, and Troy shows.
Woohoo! Troy.
And, I'm not going to blame him for showing. Obviously, I was disappointed that I came up with the wrong solution, and, he bluffed me out. I handed it to him. Although, I'd rather have people show me their bluffs than not. I know there's games I played in where people don't bluff a lot, and when they bluff, they show it. And it's really good for getting a read on them where you're confident. If you're afraid they bluffed you and they don't show it, you usually know they didn't. And you can piece together their mannerisms when they bluff and when they don't bluff. So that kind of information, I've gotten used to really when people show me bluffs of saying, okay, good, so how did the guy bluff, what did he do, and cataloging it away. So it's I wasn't happy when he showed me the bluff, but especially because it's not like Troy and I are going to be playing together many sessions. But it was more information that he's capable of making that play. It may come up useful on some future hand. At least know he's capable of putting me on something or putting me on not having something, and I can use that.
Burger.
We just see a bluff?
We sure did.
But he had a king.
It might have been a bluff with the best hand, though.
There was going to be a king on the river.
I thought it was.
Nice hand, Troy.
He could have been bluffing with the best hand, though.
Does he get a book for that or no?
And of course, if I had bluffed anyone, they wouldn't have seen it. In a regular game where it's not on TV, they definitely would never see it or never know about it. In one of these games after the session, if they asked me, I'd have probably told them the truth, since I know they're going to see it anyway.
When I'm plus, I'll straddle every time.
All right.
Actually, you're
binding.
I give you
So when it's your money, you'll straddle every
Aren't
time.
you plus?
No,
That's
I'm
a
just. I mean,
I give you some good advice though. You're better off straddling when you're down.
Exactly. When you're plus, you need to sit on that stack.
Now you don't need to sit on it, but
No, I'll only straddle every time if everybody straddles. Right now, I'm not going to straddle. But if everybody straddles, I get a little chips in front of me. I'll straddle with you.
Come on, Troy. Everybody's doing it.
Barry is raised with a pocket pair. Action folds to the straddler, who calls.
To say Raheem's a big dog would be an understatement. He's like Marmaduke.
Check in the dark.
Rick checked in the dark. 5-ace-7 on the flop.
Barry's got the best hand, but somehow Rick still manages to flop a draw while completely dominated.
Barry bet 3,500. Rick called.
Check in the dark.
Rick did a lot of checking in the dark. That's nice when somebody does that. He called my bet on the flop, and at this point, I kind of assumed he had a 7 or a 5. I wasn't really thinking about the flush draw or even the straight draw because the way he had played up till now, I thought he might raise me with something like that. And he had done something that was really nice to play against, where he did some raising on the flop and then checking on the turn. So, it kind of leaves you in control when someone does that. But here he called, and there was maybe he had a bad ace, maybe he had a 7. There were a lot of ways I could be beat at this point.
Checked in the dark again.
Raheem's trying to get cute with all this checking in the dark, but I don't think it's going to work on a guy like Greenstein.
Board pairs on the turn. And Barry checks. With a light.
Well, we see I had the best hand, and if I knew what Rick had, I would have bet the turn. I wouldn't have given him a free card. I was concerned about two things. One is if he had an ace, it looked like with an ace 7-5 up that he had one of those cards. An ace beats me, a 7 beats me, I beat a 5. And the other thing is Rick had shown enough gamble at this point that if I bet the turn, which maybe it's right, in some sense, what am I going to find out by betting? Probably what I'll find out is if I have the best hand. If he has a 5, he'll probably fold. If he has ace or 7, he'll either call or raise. So that was one of the reasons that I checked. But obviously, if I'd have taken into account he could have a straight draw, maybe it's better to bet. I was thinking the only draw he would have against me is a flush draw at this point. I didn't put him on calling with a 6-4 before the flop. I guess 6-8 is the other possible hand. But there was one other thing to fear I didn't get to, and that is there are some times where he has a draw where a guy like Rick might even raise me on the turn, and I'm never going to be able to call. If I bet and he has 6-8 of diamonds, let's say, although I think he'd have played that fast on the flop, but any flush draw, he decides to raise, I'm gone. So I didn't want to give him the opportunity of raise me out of the pot when I still might have the best hand.
Son. King on the river.
The 7 wasn't a great card for Barry since Raheem routinely calls with any pair.
And here's the other bonus about being in position behind him and playing it slowly. We know that Rick is a guy that if you give him some rope, he will try to hang himself. So the good news is I checked behind. Now it looked like I just made a continuation bet on the flop. This is, again, something that plays in the head. People know I continuation bet all the time, so they're thinking, well, I could easily have nothing. I didn't have very much. But now when a guy like Rick bets on the river, it's not a very nice board. If he had an ace or a 7, he's got me beat. If he had a bigger pocket pair, well, he could have pair 8s and have played it the same way. He's got me beat. But he probably isn't going to value bet on the river. If he has a king, now he got me beat. How could he have a king? Well, he could have had, I guess he could have had the nut flush draw that he didn't play very quickly, that he played passively and now hit a king on the turn. Or I guess he could have 5 king. But if he had a 5 king, would he bet or would he just be happy to take it down at this point? We see Rick reaching for chips, and the big question is what's beating me? And the answer really is pretty much just an ace, which he might have raised with on the flop, or a 7. So a 7's the only thing that's really consistent. Everything else is a bluff. And at this point, I'd seen enough of Rick that even though there are 3 cards higher than 6s, I remember this hand very well. Rick bet. I can't remember what he bet, but he was never getting away. The only reason I didn't beat him in the pot, because I already knew at this point when he was picking up his chips I was going to call, but I wanted to at least act a little bit like I had a problem, so I probably hesitated in tempo a second or two.
Raheem reaching for chips and bets 10,500. And Barry called.
You win.
Yes, a pot of more than 34 grand.
Barry decides 2 6s wasn't worth a value bet, but did have some showdown value.
It's a great flop for me, but it never improved.
Barry's seen more than a few river bluffs at this point from Raheem. He knows he's got a better than average chance. He's firing with complete air.
So Rick Raheem lost that pot, but he is currently tied with Biffer in total pots won at 31%.
Is that your straddle?
I thought
That North American Poker Tour passport.
I did not come here to bluff Barry Greenstein.
But you did it anyway.
It was a good play while you were here.
But you did it anyway.
No, I'm just saying that it's winning is why I came here.
I came here just to get a date with Amanda.
Isn't that nice?
I don't like your chances.
You're a couple million short.
That's not nice.
Not nice, but I don't see...
I asked my girlfriend, I was just joking with Amanda, as people know she goes out with my son Joe. And so I was just teasing. But my girlfriend said, yeah, you make her look like a gold digger. That wasn't a nice thing to say. So I'm sorry, Amanda. I didn't mean anything bad. I just tried to come up with a joke.
You're volunteering to go on the date.
Chow, king 7 suited, raises to 1100. Raheem folds. Troy on the button. Ace 9 suited.
Last time Troy had ace 9 of spades, he called and then folded for 10% of his stack.
He calls. Vipper folds. Barry Greenstein, king jack.
As you probably know, I'm not a big fan of king jack offsuit. And this was a lower than average raise against Chow. Chow had been playing pretty passively. Troy had been playing pretty passively. I thought that I may have played it against anyone because it's only 700 more and I'm in the big blind. But in a situation where if the raise was bigger, if there weren't antes, I'd just throw this hand away.
Calls.
Troy's a slight favorite heading into this flop.
10-9 Trey. Barry checks. Chow checks.
Troy flopped the best hand and he's got position.
Leads out 2,500.
2,500. This type of hand is sometimes tough to play. With 2 overcards and a gut shot, you don't feel like you can fold the hand. You may end up hitting a queen where you have the absolute nuts. It's always critical when you have these hands to say, is there a card where if I hit it, I make the absolute nuts? And even better, is there a card where I make the absolute nuts and someone else could make the second nuts? Those are always situations where you'll maybe put in a little extra money instead of folding. And, a queen does give me the nuts, and there is Jack 8 available as a second nuts. Not a likely hand, but we saw some of the stuff people are playing. It's possible. Someone's in there with a Jack 8 suited. If that happens, I could win a monstrous pot. When you're playing deep stack, no limit hold'em, those pots, you wait all day for one of those situations to come up. So I don't want to throw that opportunity away right now by folding. On the other hand, I could play it as a semi-bluff. I could raise with my 2 overcards and a gut shot, and I might win the pot right there. Might have worked here. If I raised, we now see nobody's got a 10. It would have made it so I'm the one representing the 10. And there's a good chance, though, I might have had to bet here and bet again on the turn to get away with it. So I decided to keep the pot small, and as I recall, I decided to just call here.
Barry's got 2 overcards and a gut shot.
And Barry makes the call. Chow folds. So from 3 on the flop to a pair on the turn, which is the 5 of diamonds.
Now Troy's got a decision. If I had a 10, he doesn't want to put any more money in. But if I had a 10, I might have raised. So it's got to be right for him to continue betting here and make sure if I have, actually a more likely hand for me to even have than king jack is queen jack. I guess I could even have the bottom end of the straight draw with an 8-7. So he doesn't want to give me free cards with those kind of hands. And you see a lot of times some timid players will, his hand is pretty mediocre, will check on the turn and give up that free card. You can see how vulnerable, king, queen, or jack comes off, I beat him. And betting, there's a good chance he can take it down. Or if I take it back, I'll have to raise him. So if I'm in his position, I like to put another bet in here. If I'm going to check, I'll check on the river, not here. And, that's just a better play.
Barry checks.
Troy's still out in front with his pair of 9s.
And bets 5,000.
And he made a decent bet. He betted, and he bet more than half the pot. And now, with implied odds, I'm priced out here. I'm probably not going to get paid off enough. We can see by the odds there, I've got 20% equity in the pot approximately. I'm a 4-to-1 underdog. Doesn't make sense to call 5,000 out of position. If a big card comes, he's just going to check anyway, so checking to won't get me extra money. If a big card comes and I bet, he's probably going to fold. So, he made a good play by betting. My only way to win the pot now, I mean, I could win it by calling and drawing up. It's probably not the right play. The other shot I have is playing as a semi-bluff and raising here. It's a play I'll make sometime. I would have been more inclined to make this play if I had King-Jack suited and picked up the flush draw on the turn, because that way when I go wrong, I have so many outs. I have lots of ways to hit the hand.
And Barry's out of here.
Decides he doesn't want to chase his straight anymore.
And Troy picks up a little cash.
And one other thing to say, when I call with a hand like that and call on a flop like that, it's better the weaker my opponent is. We could see if I was against a really weak opponent, and Troy was good enough not to be that weak opponent, they would give me a free card on the turn. And so it makes my pre-flop and on-the-flop calls even stronger. So if you're playing that way, where you're really passive and giving people a lot of free cards, we see some players play like that. They get unlucky a lot. And they always complain, look at the guy didn't have any outs and he drew out of me. Well, it's, the real, I don't say it because I don't want to insult people, but the thought in my head is, it's unlucky you play bad, and that's why you lose. And Troy played well here and deprived me of that river card. So that is the last hand I played here on episode 2.